Allow me.
James Bond has raked up more than his fair share of kills over the years, facing off against dozens of villains over the course of his adventures, and true to form, cinematic justice is almost always served, with 007 often the one dealing the final blow. The vast majority of Bond's adversaries are male and are dispatched of with fitting fanfare for main villains. However, things become a little murkier when it comes to dispatching female baddies, something that happens so little in the film series, particularly in the most recent Daniel Craig era, that to an entire generation of fans, James Bond just flat out doesn't kill women. Or rather, not directly anyway. This is what we're going to be looking at in this installment of The Myths of James Bond, a video series looking at some of the wider misconceptions surrounding the world of 007. If you're a big Bond fan too and wish to stay up to date on future Bond and spy related videos I upload to this channel, then please consider scrolling below and clicking the subscribe and or Mrs. Bell button. Subscribing to small channels such as my own can be really helpful when it comes to the algorithms recommending these videos to new audiences who might also get something out of them. So if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so down below.
What a helpful chap.
James Bond obviously has a very particular public image when it comes to women, with the man's promiscuity being one of his more defining character traits.
You think of women as disposable pleasures rather than meaningful pursuits.
Female villains are often included in groupings with Bond girls, characters like Fiona Volpe and Xenia Onatopp, but personally I've often exclusively categorized these characters as villainous henchmen, and as such rules apply differently to their roles, specifically that villains must always have their comeuppance and must be killed for their crimes. It's the way of cinematic justice after all. And yet the Bond series has a history of being kinda squeamish when it comes to showing 007 killing these female villains, and often if there is a female villain in the film, then they tend to be killed by other characters. Rosa Klebb in From Russia with Love and Miranda Frost in Dine of the Day spring to mind, both being taken out by their respective films' lead Bond women. However, sometimes the story dictates that Bond himself must deliver the fatal blow, and the films tend to handle this in a less direct way than some of Bond's male adversaries. Let's start by looking at Fiona Volpe in Thunderball, because this is really the first time Bond deliberately takes the life of a woman on screen. I say deliberately because who knows if Sister Rose and Sister Lily escaped Crab Key successfully after Bond caused its destruction. In the scene, Bond is dancing with the villainess and ultimately uses her as a human shield to block the bullet from another baddie. The scene plays out over super quick edits, and while I think it's clear that Bond is deliberately using her as a human shield, I've heard some people suggest that this is actually just a well-judged accidental dance move on his part. Now, I think it's clear, slowing it down, that the look on Connery's face, this is obviously a deliberate act, but it's easy to see how some people might have initially left the scene with question marks about it, but more importantly, it certainly sets the precedent for a more indirect way of Bond taking out female baddies. It's someone else who pulls the trigger on her after all. He just had to use her as a human shield in the moment to save his own life.
Mind if my friend sits this one out? She's just dead.
Funnily enough, in the Thunderball remake Never Say Never Again, Bond kills Fiona's counterpart character, Fatima Blush, in such a direct way. I mean, he literally blows her up at point-blank range. The next prominent female death at the hands of Bond comes in The Spy Who Loved Me, with Drax's helicopter pilot Naomi. Initially, her appearance in the action sequence is played for laughs, and there's a certain brilliant cartoonishness to her and Bond winking and nodding in acknowledgement to each other before Bond takes the Lotus into the water and uses a missile to take out Naomi's helicopter. At no point do we see Naomi scream or seem even remotely uncomfortable. There's a certain detachedness to the whole thing. We don't see her in pain, it's just boom and she's gone. Funnily enough, also in The Spy Who Loved Me, there's this curious scene with a character named Felicia. Bond initially turns the charms on her for information, but she's clearly there with ulterior motives, and when she notices that Bond is about to be shot, for some reason she screams and then... No! ends up shot. Not clear if Bond was using her deliberately as a human shield, whether she was deliberately sacrificing herself for him, or whether she was just trying to get away and then was shot by accident. I don't consider this a Bond kill, though, like I do Fiona in Thunderball, where his motivations in leading to the character's death are very clear. This is a very ambiguous moment, and even the novelization doesn't really make it clear. After that, it's all the way up until GoldenEye, before Bond is again seen killing a female character, Xenia Onatopp, and again, there's a certain detachedness to it. Funnily enough, it involves a helicopter again, and Bond also gets assistance from the film's Bond girl, Natalia, who distracts Xenia for a moment, allowing Bond to take down the helicopter Xenia is attached to, pulling her back into a tree and crushing her to death. Brosnan's Bond again, just 2 films later, kills the main villain of The World Is Not Enough. Elektra King presents the most direct and cold kill from Bond of all the series' female villains. The entire film is constructed around the notion that Bond falls in love with the main villain, and ultimately they don't shy away from him eventually having to kill her. her, and it's in a really cold fashion too. But even then, the character is given a chance to repent, to call off her evil scheme, which is a custom not extended to the vast majority of other Bond villains. The film puts Bond in a situation and makes it very, very clear to the audience that he has no other option but to kill her. But once those characters are covered, that's kinda it, and for a film series nearly 60 years old where the main character has a license to kill and kills people so much that it even annoys other characters,
Damn him, he killed him.
that's remarkably few. Female villains, of course, appear throughout the series, but most are just subdued by Bond, or taken out by other characters, or just plain vanish from the series completely. Bambi and Thumper are definitely in the first of those categories. In Diamonds Are Forever, Bond is able to render these incredibly physical characters useless by just holding them underwater. Prominent henchwoman like Helga Brandt is taken out by her own boss in You Only Live Twice, and Mayday, in A View to a Kill, takes her own life, sacrificing herself to save the day. Irma Bunt from On Her Majesty's Secret Service is probably the most prominent villain in the entire series to literally get away with murder. This lady wielded the gun that put bullets in Bond's wife on their wedding day, and she makes out of the series scot-free. Now, I know that the producers felt that they couldn't include the character in the sequel film, Diamonds Are Forever, as a result of actress Ilsa Stepat sadly passing away, but this is a film series that had 3 different Blofelds in 3 consecutive films. It feels really odd that the Bunt character never appears again in a series that has no qualms with recasting. So really, 4 instances in the official film series, and that's it, and I was stunned at how short this list was given the duration of the series. But this is obviously conscious decision making, and a big part of this is almost certainly down to 007's reputation when it comes to female characters. He's typically cold and detached, particularly in the Craig era, and he has no qualms about using sex as a way to gain information or leverage. And I suppose a big part of the thinking is that there's a fear that audiences might dislike the character if he's regularly seen killing women on screen as much as he is men, on top of the kind of way he effortlessly manipulates them with sexuality. Bond's role in the death of female characters, aside from villains, though, tends to come from just being involved in their situations.
I might as well ask you if all the vodka martinis ever silenced the screams of all the men you've killed. Or if you find forgiveness in the arms of all those willing women. For all the dead ones you failed to protect.
There are many sacrificial lamb characters throughout the series whose deaths often raise the stakes of the situation and provide 007 additional motivation to go and get the main villain. In that sense, James Bond has a higher female body count, particularly in the Moore era, where it's practically a trope that at least one Bond girl will die per film. In the Craig era, this has become a prominent trope too, and I think we were all quite surprised that Monica Bellucci's character made it out of Spectre unscathed, but each of his first 3 films has a prominent female character perish as a result of their entanglement with Bond, even if he's not directly killing them himself. The Craig era is also notable for not giving us a prominent female villain yet. Yes, some of Blofeld's computer staff inspector are women, and Severine is presented as something of a femme fatale character, but there are so many great female villain parts in the 007 canon, and I really hope that they're willing to let that tradition continue in some form in the future, but I can't help but feel like, certainly in this current Daniel Craig era, there's some skittishness about this, and that's a shame, particularly when characters like Fiona Volpe, Mayday, and Xenia Onatopp can become absolute highlights of their respective films and fan-favourite characters. This is also, in a way, kind of jarring for those of us who played Bond games during the Pierce Brosnan era, where there were constantly female villains to do battle with. There's a one-on-one shootout with Xenia and GoldenEye, and The World's Not Enough has the player kill Elektra, much like in the film, but even in the games with original stories, like Agent Under Fire is notable for having the main villain be a woman in Malprave, and then she also has Carla the Jackal as one of her main henchmen, both of whom perish during the game's events, and the latter in a particularly grisly fashion. In Nightfire, Kiko is killed by Bond in a really cold cutscene. Well, cold in the metaphorical sense, of course. Obviously, it was very, very hot for Kiko herself, and in Everything or Nothing, Heidi Klum plays Katia Nadanova, who dies once the player destroys her fighter jet, and that's just to name a few. So yes, clearly over the years, Bond has had a few instances where he has a very deliberate role in killing female characters. More prolific, though, seems to be his tangential role in female characters' deaths, and the series even calls itself out on this.
Look how well your charm works, James. They'll do anything for you, won't they? How many is that now?
Tilly in Goldfinger, Plenty in Diamonds Are Forever, Rosie Carver in Live and Let Die, Kareen in Moonraker, Paris in Tomorrow Never Dies, Andrea in The Man with the Golden Gun, Fields in Quantum of Solace, Aki in You Only Live Twice, Liesel in For Your Eyes Only, and this is not a comprehensive list. There are more, but Bond's presence in each of these stories ultimately leads to the death of these women, whether he was conscious of it or not. We don't even see him hearing of the death of Kareen in Moonraker, and she was one of the most drawn out and haunting deaths in the entire series, and it has no effect on Bond for the rest of the film. Bond's direct female body count is arguably limited to just these 4 characters, 5 if we're including Never Say Never Again in here, and even then I've seen comments from people who don't consider Bond to be ultimately responsible for Fiona's death, so this number may vary from fan to fan, but that list is certainly dwarfed when compared with the one concerning Bond's less direct but undeniable involvement in the deaths of so many female co-stars. When I was writing the script for this video, I had to put some questions out on Twitter because, honestly, Bond's female body count was so low that I had to check if I was missing anything, and there was some really great discussion on there, which I think highlights how ambiguous some of Bond's kills of female villains are, in a way that I don't think we have with his male villains. Fiona Volpe, again, is an example of a character where there was some discussion about whether that even counts as a Bond kill or not. A friend and co-podcaster of mine, Dr. Lisa Funnell, author of For His Eyes Only, The Women of James Bond, as well as other texts looking at the James Bond franchise, sent me a message that I felt summed up the subject of Bond killing women in the films in a far more eloquent and succinct way than I ever could. She very kindly recorded this for me for use in this video, so over to Dr. Lisa.
There appears to be a double standard in the Bond film. While women can hurt Bond and try to kill him, he does not hurt them back in the same way. One reason for this could be a concern on the part of filmmakers about how audiences at the time would respond to Bond killing a woman. Violence against women is often linked to notions of female victimization. Audiences might sympathize and side with the woman, vilifying Bond in the process. The politics of representation in the franchise are designed to sanction Bond's mission. They are not only institutionally permitted by MI6, in other words, they're not illegal, but they also need to be socially palatable and acceptable for audiences. As a result, Bond was given a license to kill, but does not regularly use it towards women. This in turn undermines the efficacy of women's aggressive actions and results in their depiction as somewhat inferior agents. One way around this issue was to place the responsibility for violence against women onto Spectre, with women villains being killed by Blofeld or one of his henchpeople. Any negative reactions to their deaths would be linked to the organization, working to further vilify them while keeping the hands of Bond clean. This approach continues forward in the 1970s, with women villains being killed by the arch-villain. The only exception is Naomi in The Spy Who Loved Me, who is the first woman villain Bond directly kills in the series, albeit at a distance, using a missile. In the Brosnan era, the gender politics governing Bond's license to kill have been updated. This is due to the influence of post-feminism in popular media, a popular yet problematic social movement that put forward the notion that women have achieved social equality. The Bond films of the 1990s present the impression that the world around Bond has changed, as well as the women who inhabit it. Beginning in the Brosnan era, Bond kills his adversaries regardless of their gender. In other words, he can and does kill women. He is able to assert his masculinity over dangerous women who challenge him physically, emotionally, and sexually. Moreover, he kills them in the same manner in which they threaten him. Xenia Onatopp is asphyxiated between 2 tree branches that look like a pair of legs, and Elektra King is shot in the heart after emotionally manipulating Bond.
To hear more from Dr. Lisa Funnell, I highly recommend checking out her podcast, License to Critique, as well as following her on the socials. I'll be leaving the relevant links below, and you can hear both of us talking about Bond on the James Bond and Friends podcast. So let me know below what your thoughts are on this particular topic. As I say, when I put this out on Twitter, I had some really interesting discussions and different points were raised, so I'm very curious to see what the YouTube consensus is on this particular topic. Also below, you can find links to my various social media pages, including my Facebook page, my Twitter page, and my Patreon page. And why not click the subscribe button as well if you really want to stay up to date with future video uploads that I make on this channel. And with all that being said, until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.